The Bible, as an inspired work of literature, has many forms of literature within it. Poetry and wisdom books are poetic because they have a rhythm in the chosen words as a means to emphasize and express emotion. They are also considered wisdom literature because they contain insights, values, and morals. The book of Job uses eloquent dialogue and addresses an issue which conventional wisdom is unable to answer adequately. What are we to do when life doesn't make sense? The book of Job provides answer to this type of question. It seems illogical and unfair for bad things to happen to good people. Job believed, as do many today, that if he lived a life of being and doing good, then God would bless and reward him. This is why he was greatly puzzled when a string of tragedies befell him, and yet he could not recall what sin or evil he could have done to merit this punishment. Many believe that bad things happen as a punishment for bad things done, and vice versa. But the Bible never says that exactly. It does teach, however, that God rewards good and punishes evil, either in this life or the next. In chapter 1, Job is presented as a man who was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 oxen, 500 donkeys, and plenty of servants. Basically, Job was well off. Unknown to Job, Satan, the name means adversary, had a conversation with God and said that Job's good behavior was only as a result of the many blessings God had given him. Satan insisted that, "But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." God allowed Satan to test Job. Satan is portrayed in Job's story as a scheming and calculating spiritual adversary is being shown here. Later writing from the 1st century to the late Middle Ages, the Prince of Darkness is depicted as a terrifying demon. Job received all sorts of bad news about his donkeys and oxen being stolen, that his sheep and servants were destroyed by the fire, that his camels were also taken away, and that his children were killed in a tragic accident. Job's response is the model of courage and faith. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Whereas patience was Job's hallmark in the first 2 chapters, in chapter 3, Job showed humanity and vulnerability when he cursed the day of his birth. "May the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, a boy is born. That day may it turn into darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine upon it. May darkness and deep shadow claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm its light. That night may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, nor be entered into any of the months." In chapter 10, Job became frustrated and even angry at what had happened to him, and so he pleaded with God to tell him why he was causing him such great suffering. In chapter 38, God responded to Job, but his long response did not answer any of Job's questions. God never told Job why these bad things happened to him, but instead asked Job why he dared to question him. God then answered Job's question with a question. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb, when they made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when they fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no farther. Here is where your prow wave halt. Have you ever given order to the morning, or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me, if you know all this. For many, the bottom line of the book of Job is that human life must accept the reality of unanswered questions, such as why there is evil in the world and why innocent people must suffer. Being able to accept that there may just be no answers after all, and being able to live with these unanswerable questions is what Job learned at the end of this story. The Psalms are the most poetic of all the wisdom books in the Bible. They contain imagery, parallelism, internal rhythm, and were written to be sung as hymns and or to be prayed individually or in a group setting. Song of Songs is another book of the Old Testament, also known as the Song of Solomon or Canticle of Canticles. It describes lovers through love and the wedding. The image of two loving spouses is the allegory that the early Christian church adopted from St. Paul when he said, Christ loves the church as the groom his bride. The image of God as a faithful husband and Israel his beloved is another valid application. The Greek Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate coincide exactly with the Hebrew and Protestant Bible numbering of Psalms 1 through 8. The change occurred in Psalm 9. The Greek and Latin versions have 39 verses in Psalm 9, whereas the Hebrew version has only 21 and counts verses 22 through 39 as Psalm 10. That results in the Septuagint and Vulgate having Psalm 10 to be equivalent to the Hebrew Psalm 11 and so on, until Psalm 147 in the Hebrew, which equals to Psalm 146 and 147 in the Greek and Latin. By this point, Psalm 148 to 150 catch up in all three to reduce confusion. Traditionally, Psalms are classified into four types: liturgical, lament, thanksgiving, and imprecatory curse psalms. Liturgical psalms were used in a temple for worship services, on high holidays or for royal events, such as the coronation of the king. Laments were expression of sorrows and contrition for sins, or pleas for deliverance from suffering. Thanksgiving psalms were songs that showed gratitude and appreciation for God's blessing. Curse psalms were cries for justice. When the Bible speaks of curse or imprecatory psalms, it is not in the sense of placing a curse on someone, which is done in magic, sorcery, and witchcraft. These cries for justice are not to be equated with revenge. One can also categorize the 150 Psalms according to the Torah or Pentateuch. Genesis, which has the theme of creation, can also be seen in Psalms 1 to 41. Exodus, which has the theme of deliverance and redemption, can be associated with Psalm 42 to 72. Leviticus, which focuses on worship, can be linked with Psalms 73 to 89. Numbers, which describes the period of wandering in the desert, is reflected in Psalms 90 to 106. Finally, Deuteronomy, which highlights the word given by God, can be identified with Psalms 107 to 150. Psalm 23 is often read at funerals and in times of persecution, danger, or trial. It is one of the best known and most memorized psalms Christians learn by heart. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Another favorite is Psalm 51, also called the Miserere, which is the first word of this psalm in Latin, meaning have mercy. This psalm is a favorite with Lutheran, Episcopalian, and Catholic Christians, especially during the season of Lent, 40 days between Ash Wednesday and Easter. A penitential time of introspection, repentance, and conversion of the heart. There are a total of 7 penitential psalms: 6, 32, 38, 51, 102, 130, and 143. Tradition is that King David wrote Psalm 51 after repenting from his sin of adultery with Bathsheba. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you only have I sinned, and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are proved right when you speak and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Surely you decide truth in the inner parts, you teach me wisdom in the inmost place. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sin, and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence, or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will turn back to you. Save me from blood guilt, O God, the God who saves me, and my tongue will sing of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. In your good pleasure, make Zion prosper. Build up the walls of Jerusalem, then there will be righteous sacrifices, whole burnt offerings to delight you. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. It is believed that King David wrote the Psalms and played and sang them before the Ark of the Covenant. Solomon, on the other hand, is traditionally given the credit for the book of Proverbs, as they denote words of wisdom, which he was known for more than anyone else. Wisdom, as opposed to intellectual knowledge, is the ability to make good and prudent decisions. It is not having all the answers, but rather having the courage and knowledge to look for them. Proverbs 1 verses 2 to 4 tell us that these writings are good for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Jesus and his disciples quoted Proverbs as evidenced by John 7, Romans 12, and James 4. Whereas human proverbs demonstrate human common sense, the book of Proverbs is a source of heavenly wisdom by which men and women can model their lives so as to attain wisdom and eternal peace. Biblical wisdom has eternal reward as motivation. Wisdom literature does not dilute the value of human wisdom or common sense. Biblical wisdom offers divine advice and guidance for daily living as well as eternal happiness. The fact that some proverbs show similarities to wisdom literature of Egyptian, Persian, or Babylonian writings does not detract from their inspired status. Biblical wisdom has eternal and celestial reward as motivation. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. This is how many versions of the Bible open the book of Ecclesiastes. The NIV Bible reads, "Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." No matter how it is said, Ecclesiastes repeats this theme several times. It is considered a kind of tough wisdom, where what has to be said is said. At first glance, Ecclesiastes chapter 3 may appear a bit fatalistic. Things happen, get used to it, sort of motto. When examined more closely, this book speaks of humility. When the believer is confronted with paradoxes such as life and death, health and sickness, joy and sorrow, Ecclesiastes chapter 3 reminds the reader that none of these will last since time keeps turning. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. The Book of Wisdom is one of the 7 deuterocanonical apocryphal books. Often the book is called The Wisdom of Solomon. It is unlikely that King Solomon wrote this book, as it appears to be an encouragement for the diaspora Israelites in exile during the Babylonian captivity. Two main points are supposedly made in Wisdom. The first is not to abandon the faith and traditions of faith just to fit in with neighbors. And the second is that there is an afterlife where good is rewarded and evil punished. Wisdom is spoken of in Ecclesiasticus, or the book of Sirach, and in the book of Wisdom with a feminine pronoun, she. The Hebrew, Greek, and Latin words for wisdom are chokmah, sophia, and sapientia, which have feminine gender. The book of Sirach is also known as Ecclesiasticus, from the Latin church book, since it was used a lot by the early church fathers. Like the book of Wisdom, it is one of the 7 deuterocanonical apocryphal books. It offers some practical wisdom for everyday life, as in the case with chapter 6, on the value of friend. Faithful friends are a sturdy shelter. Whoever finds one has found a treasure. Faithful friends are beyond price. No amount can balance their worth. Faithful friends are life-saving medicine, and those who fear the Lord will find them. Those who fear the Lord direct their friendship aright, for as they are, so are their neighbors also. Please go to YouTube Retirement channel playlist Bible Studies for the complete series of these introductory materials.